you oftentimes don't realize you should have saved it until you realize you didn't save it. And then it's like, where is that?
Right.
One of these tabs somewhere, some file, some project. But
if you believe we can change the narrative, if you believe we can change our communities, if you believe we can change the outcomes, then we can change the world. I'm Rob Richardson. Welcome to Disruption Now. All right, welcome to Disruption Now. I'm your host and moderator, Rob Richardson. With me is Tsavo Knott. He is the technical founder and technical co-founder of Pieces for Developers. They have a presence here in Cincinnati, Ohio, so we're proud to have them here, but they're all across the country really helping developers with their workflow and making life easier for them. Tsavo, how you doing, brother?
Hey, what's going on, Rob? Thank you for having me today, and looking forward to getting into it. You're absolutely right. Just making life a little bit nicer for developers, one bit of code at a time, for sure.
So I'm curious, Tsavo, like what inspired you to start Pieces for Developers? Specifically, what was the problem you were trying to solve?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like, as an entrepreneur, there's the ebbs and flows between companies, and to put it in perspective, this is my third company and my fifth major project.
Oh,
and
wow.
Company number, it's crazy, right? So you can learn the incrementals. The first was a language learning startup called Accent.ai way back in like 2016. The second was basically a higher education Slack, right? So you'd plug into the school's database and you create group chats for all your classes, clubs, dorms, teams, etc. But that one was really focused on how people collaborate, right? You're sending group messages, you're sending, files and things like that, and you're collaborating on your work. And that was the EdTech space pre-COVID, long sales cycle, lots of regulation, and universities were like, why do we need group chats for our classes? It seems like an obvious question now, but back then, we, for a number of reasons, we ended up sunsetting that company, right? And the pivot was, let's not focus on how people collaborate. Let's focus on the what, right? What are the things that they're interested in saving for themselves, sharing to their teammates? What are the small bits of work, the pieces of that work in progress journey, be it a developer, a designer, an animator, any digital worker? What are the focal points day in, day out that they're operating on? And one of those focal points are the things that you copy and paste to your clipboard, right? So think about every time you copy and paste, a link or a code snippet, or if you're a designer, like artboards and layers and color palettes. And so we really started to focus on the things that are atomic that you're reusing, 100 times a day, right? Where are those things? Where do they come from? What are the other things connected to them? So, you have a bit of code. All right. What project was it related to? What website were you researching before you worked on that code? And who were you talking to later on in the pipeline about an error related to that code, or, where that code is architecturally kind of implemented? So there's this larger context beyond the focal point, which is that small material. And so we built Pieces, right, which is focused on the small materials. Product one, market one is Pieces for Developers. And in short, the goal is to help developers remember anything and interact with everything, right? And when it comes to memory, it's like, how people say an image is worth 1,000 words? Well, right. For developers, a code snippet is worth 1,000 words, right? And it just recalls all of that context. So starting from there, we wanted to reimagine what it looks like to save, search, share, reference, and reuse at a more granular level, right?
Right.
And have all that context captured. So phase one was humans can save things in pieces, right? Classic copy, Command C, right. Command V, copy paste. Phase two, you got the AIs, right? Everyone's talking about copilots. Right. And so it's like generate some code, iterate, and then save from what you generate. And now we're in phase three, which is Pieces can identify what will be important for you later and save that proactively. Because the challenge with any saving is you oftentimes don't realize you should have saved it until you realize you didn't save it. And then it's like, where is that?
Right.
One of these tabs somewhere, some file, some project. But that's how we got here to Pieces. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So you had two other companies before this.
That's right. Yeah.
So there was some failure, if you want to call that, learning lessons, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
What was the most important thing you learned from those past failures or those past learnings?
Yeah, one of those things is not necessarily something I learned, but maybe something that I kind of proved out in my own testing grounds. And that's one of those things that my father always tells me. He says something will always lead to something else, right? Everything leads to something next. And, as a younger person, you're like, this is it, it's going to be the best thing ever. Like, this is, what we're going to do. And you feel that way when you're starting a company. But, identifying when to kind of lift yourself above the trees and take a moment to reflect and maybe pivot. I think that's super important. But at that moment of pivot, don't consider everything as a loss. Just look at it as, recyclable materials for the next thing. And I think, so many people, they get caught up in like, oh, this didn't work. Yeah. But, a sole source of truth for me is, I quickly found out it's not the idea that you think will work the best. It's the ideas that you can disprove and basically say they won't work the fastest. Right. Wow. So it's like, it's not about
the
success.
Ideas you think will work. It's the ideas you can disprove that don't work.
That's right. It's like eliminate the search space as fast as possible. Right. That process of elimination, when you're in a startup world, you're figuring out like, of all the ways to solve this problem or of all the problems to solve, what are the best ones? And that's such a vast volume of kind of problem sets that you're like, eliminate as much of that space as possible by just trial and error. Right. Yeah. And so, failing fast is really the name of the game. It's not succeeding. It's just not going to be the first. And the first is always the worst. That's what they say.
The first is always the worst. That's good to know. That's good to know. So I'm curious, you're an entrepreneur. You said this is multiple times over. If you were talking to your younger self, you want to talk to a younger entrepreneur.
Yeah.
What advice would you give yourself, seeing what you know now and talking to yourself then? And what advice would you ignore?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this, there's no way around it. It's only through it, right? So you have to continuously remind yourself that, the startup world is one of the most selective processes out there, right? It is, trying in a multiple, capacity regard, right? It'll try you on your physical health, your mental health, you're solving hard problems all the time. You're dealing with a bunch of other people's. You're going to get a lot more no's than you get yeses. And you have to just remember, like, that is what a selective process is, right? And so, I would say, there's really no comparison, right? You're never like comparing yourself to another company or yourself to another, founder, things like that. I think you got to just be intrinsically, motivated to say, here's where my bar was, and, here's where my bar is next, right? And as long as you realize that you're in a process, there's no shortcuts throughout that process. It is a selective and difficult process. And the goal of that process is to continue to raise your own ceiling. That'll keep you in the right headspace, right? And then I would say, the level of commitment that you have to keep in mind is, you're deployed, right? You're not coming back until the project's done, if you will. And you have to stay at it because, the thing is, they always say 9 out of 10 startups fail. But if you are a founder, you actually get to improve your odds, right? So the first one, that is 9 out of 10 out the gate. But the second one, you maybe improve those odds to like 7 out of 10. And then the third one, it's like 5 out of 10 until you get the rhythm. And so it is about at-bats and that kind of fortitude that you need. I would say, something that I would probably ignore that I would have maybe told myself earlier, I guess, which are things that I would keep doing, if you will.
Yeah.
I would say putting in, like, always doing your homework. It's like, you got to understand, you never know what you know, right? And you never know what you don't know. It's like every night you got to say, okay, what's the research from this team? What's the research from the product team, the infrastructure team, the ML team? And just continue to put in that extra couple hours just to like ground yourself in a lack of knowledge and then try to fill in that gap. And I think you got to continue to learn, right? And I would say there's no limit to learning. Reinvent yourself every 12 to 24 months in the startup world, right? Yeah. Forget what you thought was working and then basically reinvent it and go explore as if you know nothing. Yeah. That's kind of the key.
No, that's really good. So it's a good transition to talk about our artificial intelligence, because there's a lot of folks that are, and I think a lot of people that are in your space are, many are excited, many are worried, if we're being straight up, right? I think developers are particularly concerned that, is artificial intelligence going to replace us? Are they just going to become the programmers? And what's your perspective on artificial intelligence when it comes to programming and in terms of what it means for developers?
Yeah, I think AI is just another tool, to be completely honest. I think that there are several fundamental constraints which will kind of prohibit the scalability of AI to the point where it replaces us. If you think about, like just the compute, right? How much you have to process, the size of the code base, the knowledge that's out there, et cetera. We don't have enough computers, let alone raw materials to solve that problem today, right? It doesn't matter how good your models are, how much energy you have, and things like that. So I'd say at least for the next decade.
So you feel like it's for a while, it's not a software problem, it's a hardware problem. That's what I hear you saying. It's an infrastructure problem.
Yeah, it is certainly an infrastructure problem. And you've seen the rise in NVIDIA and things like that. But that just kind of says like, hey, for the next 10 years, we still need to leverage the amazing kind of quantum computers that are the human brain to orchestrate these AI tools, right? And I think that they will evolve the role of the developer, and it's less about going deep within, one bit of code or something like that, and more about going horizontal, because the beauty of the human mind is its ability to, connect dots at a macro level, which is not what we're seeing with AI today, right? AI has a limited context window in which it can have, short-term memory and connect those dots. Humans are uniquely poised to leverage AI to connect dots faster in a more broad spectrum. So I think our goal, at least here at Pieces, is to harmonize human and AI work streams. It's not to replace human work streams. It's to harmonize and create surface area between the work that a human does and the work that AI augments, if you will. Our world is humans plus AI, not AI replaces humans.
Yeah. So, but I hear you saying that there's a possibility. It sounds like in 10 years, if it's possible in 10 years where things could change. That's the worst case scenario in terms of like, there could be some replacement if that happens. But in the short term, this is the best opportunity for developers right now. So definitely run through the door.
Yeah, I think for everyone, I will say like we won't have a step function in capability until our underlying infrastructure is all quantum, right? And so until we get to the point where we've rewritten this AI software to run on quantum hardware, that's when you can really get past the boundaries of compute and energy requirements. And then I would say, so that's at least a decade, right? And then I would also say, at least for AI and the rest of the world, not necessarily for developers, but the hardware, right? So like the robot that has the AI inside of it, that's also really, really far behind, if you will.
Yes.
And I think also too, like the multimodality of AI, like if you look at humans, we have,
when people say multimodality, some people know, but we're saying like image to text, text to image, voice to the multiple ways you could have input. You could have different type of outputs. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So humans, like think about it, like we have 5 senses, they're all coordinated, they're all filtered, they're all real time, and they're all, multidimensionality. And I think like if you take an AI that is a large language model and it's good at, outputting code or processing an image or something, and you say, all right, how do we coordinate all that together in an energy and compute efficient way? That's also at least 10 to 15 years out.
Yeah.
So what will happen is we will start to identify what AI does well and what it doesn't do well. And then we will kind of evolve to orchestrate different AI systems to get us where we want to go, to be honest. Yeah.
All right. So I'm curious, in let's say 10 to 15 years, outside of a huge monetary exit, which we know that's success for Pieces for developers, like what does success look like in terms of what Pieces has done for the world, for others? What does success look like other than obviously you having your own exit or whatever that's good. I want you to have it. Don't forget your friends.
Sure.
But, but other than that, what does success look like?
I think that Pieces, from a success perspective, it will usher in this era of, tools that work with you. Like think about like, Iron Man, right? Like Jarvis is the AI assistant inside of Iron Man's suit, right? And Jarvis is unprompted, it's helpful, it's real time, and it's continuous. And if you think about like what Pieces could do for the end user is it will reset consumer expectations to where the tools are not tools that you use, but they're tools that do things for you proactively, right? They kind of stay with you, if you will. And so, this idea of, okay, phase 1 of Pieces was humans can save something to Pieces. Well, that's a bit of a challenge because they might forget to save, or they have to, go and click some buttons and do some stuff consciously. But in phase 3, if pieces can save for you, that's an example of ushering in this new type of tool that identifies and anticipates what you're going to need later and does that proactively on your behalf. And then, on the other side of that is you have co-pilots today. You type in a question, you get a response back and so on. Well, for us, the next wave of that is I shouldn't have to type sentences, right? I should just be looking at something, maybe a bit of code, and pieces should give me all of the relevant context, snippets, links, people, folders, files, etc. And then when I switch context, pieces gives me new things. And so this is a type of system where it's like do nothing, gain everything. And the learning overhead to use that type of tool is less and less, right? You don't have to figure out all the buttons to click, all the features it has, etc. It just feels like an extension of your natural thought. And I think like for us and others, we want to define that as the next evolution of human device interfacing, where it's less about all the buttons you click and it's more about what you're anticipating, right? And how the system can meet you where you're going, not what you demand of it right now. And so, yeah, I think like, the era of finding things and remembering to organize things and save things and all of that, I think that should be behind us in the next couple of years, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So what does, I want to get to some final kind of takeaway questions and kind of my rapid closeout questions here. All right. So first of all, how can developers or anybody get access to your tools, learn how to use it? What does that look like? What's the process?
Yeah, so today you just go to pieces.app, you install it, you download it and install it. It's a Mac OS, Linux, and Windows application. We have a bunch of plugins, which a lot of our users really enjoy as well, but it's as simple as to figure out how to use pieces. Whatever you copy on your clipboard, you open pieces and you paste it in, right? That's kind of just saving the pieces. Then the second thing is you start a new Copilot chat, you type a question and you've got it, right? That's kind of like the ChatGPT for developers. And then very soon here, the phase 4 in August is you actually don't have to do anything. You install pieces, you turn it on, you come back to it after 30 minutes of work or something, and the feed will be populated with all types of workflow context that you've been interacting with, right? And that's kind of where, the learning overhead of how do I use pieces, when do I use it, and so on, and then how do I realize it's helpful, we want to reduce that as much as we can. So if you come in, you install it, you let it run, and then you come back 30 minutes later and you immediately see helpfulness, that's kind of where we're going with the product. But yeah, free to use, pull it down, Series A startup, let us know your thoughts for sure.
Yeah. And we're proud to have you as one of our premier partners at MidwestCon, and particularly the Future of Data Hackathon, where we're going to have hackers everywhere looking to hack all types of problems from gaming to social impact. Tell us a little bit about why you're excited to be a part of MidwestCon and have pieces involved.
Well, I think two things. Number one, the Midwest is, it's an up and coming space. It's not the San Francisco or the New York or whatever. And I will say to create synergies, you must start with compression, right? And what I mean by compression is getting all the stakeholders together, introducing a whole bunch of problem sets, a whole bunch of new technologies, a whole bunch of things to, have that Socratic form around, right? And then just spending a concentrated amount of time, a compressed amount of time getting into it. And from that, you really kind of get everyone on the same frequency and you're like, just riffing, right? It's that classic like all-nighter, if you will, with your engineers, right? You're like, okay, how do we solve this problem? We got to ship it fast, whatever. And that concentration of exchange and information over a short duration of time, like MidwestCon, that's really exciting to me, right? That's the energy we're looking for. That's where good ideas, good relationships, good collaborations are kind of spawned from. And I don't think we do that enough here in Cincinnati in a authentic regard, right? And so MidwestCon is material and, information first, as opposed to just event, centric, right? It's like, hey, we're having this event, whatever. It's like MidwestCon is like, there's a hackathon, there's a whole bunch of sessions around data and AI that's super relevant. How does it apply to healthcare? How does it apply to developers? How does it apply to all these other domains? Like that's what we typically miss from other events around here. Not to say that they're not great, but from my perspective, I think I'm pretty excited about MidwestCon. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're definitely excited to have you. All right. Final question, kind of a hard one, but I gave you a little preparation for it. What is an important truth you have that very few people agree with you on?
Yeah, truth is a tricky word, right? Because truths are always evolving, especially if you declare them as self-important. I would say, yeah, this is a hard one.
It's always a hard one because it's
Yeah,
your truth. And there's no wrong answer.
yeah. I think, yeah, this is an interesting one. Time right now will always be more valuable than time in the future, right? And a lot of people say like, hey, we've got our whole lives to live and everything like that and whatnot, but it's kind of building on like the carpe diem, right? Which is seize the day and don't take tomorrow for granted. And you have to think like every moment that you have in the present is guaranteed, right? You're already in that moment, it's there. And every moment that you think you might have is not guaranteed. And so I really think, how you act in the moment, what you set up for the future, being in a state of preparation, like if you spend your moments preparing for the next, like that's going to be, that just implies the value that you have for the next moments and also the uncertainty of them existing, right? And so a lot of people, if they just spend their day and they're just like, oh, great, I can do it tomorrow, I can do it the day after. Well, maybe they don't value, time as much as, one might who's like in this position. And I would just say you only realize that when you're extremely time poor, right? Yep. Like when I was younger and everything, and, I was like on the weekends working, doing chores, shoveling snow off people's driveways. Like I didn't value time until I got to the 80-hour work weeks, 100-hour work weeks.
We didn't value time when we had the most. Isn't that so ironic?
Right. Isn't that crazy? and that's what I'm saying is like, that's where in hindsight, it's like realize the value of your time today and understand that it is so great, right? And the impact of that is compounding. And so, yeah, I would say wouldn't recommend people to get to the extremely time poor stage before they realize the value of time that they have now. So yeah,
no,
don't
that's
take
great.
it for granted.
No, I agree. Not take it for granted. And you talk about living in the future, but you also can't live in the past, which is what a lot of people do too, right? They lean on the past, they over rely on the past, they harp on the past, they talk about what they were going to do differently, what they regret. There is no point. We only live in the present.
That's right. Yeah. and I mentioned earlier, I try to reinvent myself every 24 months or so, right? Yeah. And, assuming that what I thought I knew or how I thought to do something could have been, semi-true, but not completely true, right? And so, that's kind of a reminder to myself that it's not always about what you did, right? And it's not always about the value of what you did, because that doesn't necessarily affect the future too much. I mean, it definitely does, but you can't say, hey, we're going to stick on this company because we've already got 2 years into it, right? You got to realize, hey, maybe we got to pivot and, forget all of those theses and, create some new ones, right? Yeah. That's a hard thing to do.
It is something I say that summarizes what you said about the past, because you do need your past gives you permission for your present.
That's right.
However, right, you got to learn from the past. You can't lean on the past. Because if you lean on it, you're over, right? It's over. You just got to learn from it and learn how you build from it in the present to have a better future that doesn't exist yet.
I couldn't agree more. So that was, those were lessons that I had to learn, right? Just time is so valuable and it's so understated, but
it really is. And it keeps moving. But Tsavo, I just want to say we're proud of you. We're proud to have you in this ecosystem that you're out here changing things. And we look for the best, and we know great things are coming for Pieces for Developers. We're thankful to have you at MidwestCon, and certainly with Disruption Now, as always, you're definitely a fellow disruptor. Let's keep disrupting together. Stay on a little bit after the stream. We'll talk a little bit.
Sure thing. Rob, and appreciate you doing all this. Good stuff.
No problem, brother. Have a good one.